Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting the presentation shortly. Welcome, everyone. We still have a few people joining, so we'll begin shortly. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll begin shortly. We still have quite a few people joining in. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. The next slide. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CPUC's webinar, Funding Opportunities for Broadband Projects Closing California's Digital Divide. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat window. Next slide. My name is Hope Chrisman. I am a local government and community liaison with the CPUC's Business and Community Outreach Office. If you don't already know who your local liaison is, please reach out to one of us so we can introduce you to our team. Our role is to assist you when you have questions or need information on the utilities under our jurisdiction, CPUC regulations and proceedings, as well as to provide guidance on how to participate in our proceedings. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded. Next slide. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please type them into the chat window. We are going to be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll have time after each presentation to respond to your questions. To avoid possible confusion, please don't use any acronyms or questions in your questions or comments. Next slide. Today's presenters will be Ben Menzies from the CPUC's Communications Division and Cole Prisabella with the California Department of Technology. Ben will be discussing broadband deployment, universal service programs, regulation of telecommunications service quality, and integration of equity into CPUC's communications programs. Cole's going to be providing an overview of California's state digital equity plan, which will complement the BEAD program in identifying challenges and opportunities to close the digital divide. Now I'd like to welcome Ben Menzies. Ben is a senior policy advisor in the CPUC's communications division. Previously, he has served as an advisor to the CPUC's executive director and as an analyst in the CPUC's energy division. He holds a Master of Public Policy degree from UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Hope, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our webinar today on funding opportunities for broadband projects to close California's digital divide. Before I start, I just want to thank my colleagues in the CPUC IT and the Business and Community Outreach Office for all their hard work and planning support to make this event happen. And I want to thank you all for attending this morning to learn about these important programs. As Hope mentioned, my name is Ben Menzies. I'm a senior policy advisor here in the communications division of the CPUC. I've been fortunate enough to serve in a variety of roles here at the commission, which have all been rewarding in their own ways. But the work I'm doing in my present role is especially exciting because we are in the midst of an enormous effort to put significant public resources to work as an investment in California's future, specifically by delivering high-speed broadband internet connections to all Californians everywhere in the state. And it's a lofty goal, but thanks to the legislature, the governor, the CPUC, and the federal government, we are right in the middle of implementing multiple historic investments in this critical area, which I believe will have long-standing benefits for equity, economic growth, education, and so many other areas of our lives. So we know that the digital divide in California, or the lack of access to reliable high-speed internet service in our state, is a complex problem with a lot of different causes, from historic and ongoing disinvestment in low-income communities of color to California's uniquely complex geography, spanning everything from alpine mountains to arid deserts to coastal communities and everything in between. And so solving it will require overcoming many different kinds of challenges, and we need every tool in our toolbox to get it done. So I'm going to walk through several different programs that we have for funding grants to deploy internet infrastructure and close the digital divide in our state. And I hope you'll learn something about one of these programs that will assist in closing the digital divide in your community. Next slide, please. And those are some of the programs that I'll be getting into today. Next slide, please. I'm going to start off with the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, which has been a major topic of interest since it was established in law by the federal government in 2021. And I know a lot of you all are probably here specifically to learn about this program, so I'll dive in just a moment. But I do want to highlight that this program is still quite a ways away from actually providing grants due to the number of hurdles that we as a state still have to go through before we'll have the money in hand from the federal government and be able to actually fund projects. So therefore, I'm encouraging you to consider other funding programs in the meantime, such as our last mile federal funding account or the California Advanced Services Fund, which will be later topics of discussion. Next slide, please. Right. So what is BEAD? So the BEAD program was established as part of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden in 2021. And since then, we've been working closely with the federal agency charged with implementing this program, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And given that mouthful, I'm sure you can imagine why I'll be calling them NTIA as much as possible through this presentation. One major piece of news about this program came through this week, and that is the $1.86 billion number I have here on the slide. So NTIA just announced that this is California's share of the $42.45 billion available nationally through BEAD. So we've been waiting for this number for quite some time, and without getting into all of the details, it has been the subject of a lot of conversations to try and get that number as high as possible. And I know earlier we had some somewhat lower projections of how much money was going to come in. So we're very excited about that number. This number is based on a calculation that NTIA ran of California's share of the total number of unserved locations across the country, as well as California's share of locations specifically designated as high-cost areas. So it's not purely based on population, unfortunately, since that would make our number quite a bit higher. The only state to receive more funding than California through this calculation is Texas. So we are happy with our number, although always could be higher. And we've made our perspective known to both NTIA and the Federal Communications Commission, which generated the map that NTIA used to perform this calculation. So related to BEAD is the state's digital equity plan, which was also embedded in the IIJA and is being developed by our sister agency, the California Department of Technology. I know we have Cole Prisbilla from CDT here who will discuss that plan, but briefly, the digital equity plan and our plan for expending BEAD funds are intended to be complementary processes that inform each other. This is because equity is intended to be a central component of this program. As the federal government has informed us over the past couple of years, BEAD without equity is just bad. So finding ways to ensure equity is a central consideration in the administration of this program and will be a major focus of the CPUC's activities. So the basic structure of the program is that the PUC will award funds to subgrantees following an extensive planning process to receive public input and developing program rules that are specific to California while still falling within the bounds of the federal rules. Basically, we have discretion over elements of the program, but ultimately our plan for spending this money has to be approved by NTIA based on their interpretation of the underlying statute and their own rules. So we can't do whatever we want with this money, but we can make a lot of discretionary choices. The primary goal of the BEAD program is to deploy reliable broadband service to all unserved locations in the state. I'll highlight the language of unserved here. BEAD defines an unserved location as a broadband serviceable location, so a house or business, somewhere that can receive internet service that currently does not have internet speeds of at least 25 megabits per second download speed and 3 megabits per second upload speed. So this is contrasted with locations that are underserved, for which the threshold is 100 megabits per second down and 20 up. Locations above that threshold, that underserved location threshold, are considered served. The program rules direct us to specifically focus on serving unserved locations first, then underserved locations once we have a plan to serve all unserved locations, Finally, if we've served all unserved and underserved locations, we can use the remaining BEAD money for non-deployment uses, such as funding workforce training opportunities, or we can fund grants to community anchor institutions at gigabit speeds, such as schools and libraries. However, I want to caution everyone now that we believe California's allocation is going to be fully expended on the unserved locations and may be able to fund some of the underserved locations because we just have a lot of need in this state. Next slide, please. So I want to highlight some key milestones in this process. As I mentioned, public engagement is a major focus of this program. And we've just finished up conducting a series of 17 day-long workshops in communities across the state. And hopefully some of the folks here today were able to attend one or more of those workshops. And we've also held 3 regional tribal consultations. We also have a virtual tribal consultation remaining in July. The allocation for California, as I mentioned, was announced on Monday, the 26th. Our next deliverable is a high-level 5-year action plan, which will be submitted to NTIA and which we're planning to issue for public comment in mid-July. This will be a high-level document describing existing efforts to close the digital divide and preliminary plans to maximize the BEAD investment over the coming years and coordinate with other branches of government. So it's not going to be a fully formed plan to implement the program. And as I said, we're planning to issue that for public comment in July before submitting to NTIA in August. In parallel, we've begun the process of developing program rules through our rulemaking, which is numbered 23-02-016. This will be the vehicle for the public deliberative process through which our rules will be developed and subject to public comment. Because this is an ongoing deliberative process, there are a number of outstanding issues that we still need to determine based on feedback from parties in the proceeding. So in a minute, I'll get into what some of those issues are so that hopefully we can get feedback through the proceeding on how we should decide some of these issues. But I should also note that there will be a scoping memo issued by the administrative law judge in that proceeding soon, which will provide more details on those issues and the timeline for resolving them. So I don't want to get ahead of that process, and you should consider the items I'm going to discuss here estimated. This is our initial read of the federal rules. Additionally, the federal rules require us to submit an initial proposal within 180 days of the allocation, which is officially dated as this Friday, the 30th. So 180 days comes out to December 27th for that initial proposal. Before we submit that proposal to NTIA, we anticipate releasing a first draft for public comment in the fall, and there will be a workshop in the proceeding around the same time. Now, this initial proposal, I'm emphasizing it because this will be the program rules. Unlike the 5-year action plan, this will get into the details for how we plan to award the money, what the criteria will be for projects, and those sorts of nuts and bolts. Once NTIA approves the initial proposal, which might involve them directing us to make changes to the proposal to conform with their interpretation of federal rules, then the federal government is able to release to us the first 20% of our allocation. So that's about $370 million. The next step, once our initial proposal is approved, will be to conduct a challenge process. So this will be a process in which interested parties will have an opportunity to review the eligibility map for providing grants, submit evidence indicating that locations on the map should be changed in some way, whether from served to unserved or vice versa. And then those challenges will be adjudicated by the CPUC and ultimately signed off on by NTIA because they have to approve our final map. I'll get into this in more detail later, but basically this milestone is crucial because once we've completed the challenge process and have a final map in hand, we'll be able to begin making awards of that first 20% of funding subject to certain conditions, which I have here on the slide in parentheses. Those conditions are that the first 20% of funding can only go towards deployment projects consisting of more than 80% unserved locations and in a location where the percentage of individuals with a household income is at or below 150% of the federal poverty level is higher than the national percentage. So I know that's a lot of details. Basically, these are particularly low-income communities in California. We can seek certain waivers from this requirement, but it requires us to have a plan to meet deployment commitments set out in our final proposal, meaning our plan to get to 100% served. So that's a pretty high bar. And otherwise, we get the remaining 80% of funds once we have a final proposal approved, which can occur at any time in the subsequent year. So I know that's a lot of detail. I'm going to unpack some of that a little later on. Next slide, please. And this is a timeline showing some of the milestones I just discussed, giving a sense of what we have coming up. So we're right in the middle at the announcement of the allocation. We just finished the local and regional outreach and public comment portion. We'll run through the rulemaking, publish the 5-year action plan, the draft initial proposal, and then finally submit the initial proposal by the end of the year. At that point, we'll have the challenge process, select subgrantees, and begin making grants sometime next year. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to dive into some of the specific aspects of this program that are important to understand as you're thinking about projects in your community that might receive funding through BEAD. One of the most important things to understand about the federal requirements for this program is that there is a preference for funding fiber optic technology, although there are circumstances where this program can fund other solutions such as wireless technologies, which I'll discuss on the next slide. The Notice of Funding Opportunity that the federal government has released to us, or NOFO, is basically the main piece of guidance we've received so far on program rules. And it states very clearly that they want us to fund as much fiber as possible. The purpose of this direction is to maximize the long-term benefits of BEAD investments, since fiber technology is best suited to future upgrades, future speed needs, and long-term reliability. So the underlying infrastructure law directs us to ensure that the network built by the project can easily scale speeds over time to meet evolving connectivity needs of households and businesses, and support the deployment of 5G, successor wireless technologies, and other advanced services, which NTIA has determined only includes end-to-end fiber. NTIA expanded on this in the NOFO by stating that end-to-end fiber networks can be updated by replacing equipment attached to the ends of the fiber optic facilities, allowing for quick and relatively inexpensive network scaling as compared to other technologies. Moreover, new fiber deployments will facilitate the deployment and growth of 5G and other advanced wireless services, which rely extensively on fiber for essential backhaul. So as part of our program rules, the NOFO directs us to set what's called an extremely high cost per location threshold, which I'll address more specifically on the next slide. But basically, this is a threshold above which we've determined it's too expensive to deploy fiber to a location and other technologies become eligible. Below that cost threshold, fiber projects, a project that proposes to use fiber to deliver service to an unserved location is considered a priority project and will likely be funded absent competing priority projects that overlap. So this is subject to other program rules, so it's possible that a priority project would not be funded for some reason, but by and large, these projects are supposed to get the first cut at serving unserved locations. If there are multiple priority projects, we are directed to prioritize some other considerations, which I've included here on the slide. And those include primarily minimizing the program outlay, so lower cost, affordability to the consumer, which is a major focus of this program, and fair labor practices in the selection of the subgrantees. So then there are some secondary considerations, which are defined as secondary in the NOFO. Those include speed of deployment, so how quickly can you get the project out, technical capabilities of the applicant, equitable workforce considerations, whether you're providing open access to other providers, and coordination between the CPUC and any local or tribal governments that are involved. Finally, our rulemaking has also requested input on what other considerations should be part of these criteria. And so we'll be receiving feedback through the proceeding on anything else we should be weighing. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we are supposed to prioritize fiber deployment. However, the NTIA also recognizes that there are locations where it is simply cost prohibitive to install fiber, and we can get broadband speeds and reliability from other solutions, including wireless technologies. As I mentioned, we are required to determine an extremely high cost per location threshold through our proceeding to establish exactly where these alternative technologies can be funded. I'm going to read again from the NOFO. NTIA expects eligible entities, so that's us, to set the extremely high cost per location threshold as high as possible to help ensure that end-to-end fiber projects are deployed wherever feasible. NTIA looks forward to working with each eligible entity to help develop an appropriate, extremely high cost per location threshold. So we have to set a threshold that is as high as is feasible. However, we know that a lot of unserved locations are likely in places that will exceed that threshold because they're remote, have challenging topography, or have other challenges that just make it too expensive to deploy fiber. For these locations, we may select a proposal if it uses an alternative technology, such as wireless, still meets the BEAD program's technical requirements, so speed, latency, reliability, and is less expensive than the fiber alternative. So, and again, one more quote from the NOFO, if you'll indulge me, that it says that we are directed to seek out the most robust, affordable, and scalable technologies achievable under the circumstances particular to that location. So we still need to take a hard look at any of those projects to make sure they will serve public interests for a very long time. So just like with the priority broadband projects or the fiber projects on the previous slide, if there's a sole applicant that meets those requirements, they are sort of considered the winner by default. If there are multiple projects, we have to consider, we must prioritize the same considerations, the minimum program outlay, affordability, fair labor practices, then the secondary considerations, speed to deployment, technical capabilities, et cetera, and as well as any other criteria that are determined in the proceeding. So the point here is that we are trying to maximize both universal coverage, serving all unserved locations, and bringing reliable broadband there, and maximizing the long-term benefits of that investment so that we know that the investments we make today are going to continue paying dividends for quite some time. Next slide, please. So this graph illustrates the problem that we are trying to solve in setting the extremely high cost threshold. The CPUC has a contract with a company called CostQuest Associates, which performs data analysis on broadband deployment, including for the federal government. So we work with them to get the best quality data and use methodologies that are close to the federal government's, while still enabling us to improve where we think the federal methodologies fall short. So CostQuest worked with us to develop a broadband investment model that essentially calculates the precise locations and total numbers of unserved locations in California, and then estimates the cost of building fiber networks to serve all of those locations. If you're interested in learning more about the nuts and bolts of what goes into a broadband network and calculating those costs, I highly recommend the accompanying report, which is available on our website and linked here in the slide. It's relatively readable at 23 pages, and it gives a lot of helpful detail about how we're thinking about these costs to serve. And this graph is figure 6 of that report, charting the estimated investment required per location by the density of unserved locations in California. So along the x-axis horizontally, we have ordered unserved census blocks by density, so number of locations per square mile. And along the vertical y-axis, we have the estimated cost of deploying fiber, including the cost of potential wildfire, excluding the cost of potential wildfire hardening. As you can see, the cost to serve individual locations barely increases until you get quite a ways out to the right, meaning the least dense areas of the state. From the first percentile to the 50th percentile, it's about $2,200 per location to serve with fiber. And even all the way up to the 86th percentile, it's about $10,000 per location. So higher, but not that much higher. But when we hit the 95th percentile, it's $20,000 per location. And the 99th percentile is $49,000, with another 10,000 locations to go at even higher costs per location. So somewhere on the far right side of this graph, there's a cutoff point where we would maybe consider setting the extremely high cost per location threshold. However, remember that this is only an estimate based on the data we had at the time, and we want to hear more from stakeholders about where we should consider drawing this line and any other methodological considerations for setting the high cost threshold. Next slide, please. So some specific considerations for applicants serving multi-dwelling units. Public Wi-Fi for multi-dwelling units is explicitly allowed in the NOFO, subject to all the other rules I just mentioned. However, within these projects, the NOFO directs us to prioritize projects with high numbers of unserved locations and projects where the share of households with incomes below 150% of federal poverty level is higher than the national average. So that's the same cutoff that I referenced earlier for the first 20% of funding. To give you a sense of what that is, it's 150% of federal poverty level is $21,870 annual income for a single adult, $29,500 for a family of 2, and $45,000 for a family of 4. So we know that that is going to filter out a lot of locations in California because incomes are higher here than the national average, even though that doesn't necessarily translate to less poverty. And so that's just a challenge that we're going to have to work through because that's specified in the federal rules. Location coding for the data has inherited discrepancies, which we'll attempt to correct for as much as possible. And some of those discrepancies are especially acute for multiple dwelling units, such as apartment buildings. So on the left, I have a screenshot from the FCC's national broadband map showing a neighborhood in West Oakland with several multiple dwelling units. Each of those green dots denotes a served location according to the FCC. So bear that caveat in mind. However, as you may be able to tell, some of the boxes that indicate units don't seem to be represented by a dot. So it's possible that there are households who aren't accounted for on this map. Now, if you actually click on the FCC map, you'll see that some of these dots they indicate that there's 4 or 8 units at that location. So that may be accounted for in the map, but we don't necessarily know if that count is correct. We also don't know if the served status reported by providers to the FCC is correct, although we do attempt to validate the deployment data submitted by providers by checking to see if there are actual subscribers in the area, which the FCC does not do. There are also situations where some parts of a multiple dwelling unit may be served, while other units are not served, and the whole building gets counted as served, even though residents can't actually get service. So these are all, we want to ensure that residents are able to get the reliable broadband service they need and deserve, but we'll need your local knowledge and assistance to make sure the map we end up using to make grants reflects reality in your communities as best as possible within the rules of the BEAD program. However, I also want to highlight that BEAD is not the only game in town, and I'll discuss in a little more detail later, but this CPUC has a public housing broadband grant program that can pay for upgrading low-income multiple dwelling units with high-speed internet. And the CPUC gets to set the rules for that program to a greater degree than we do for BEAD. So if there are cases where people lack broadband but still can't make the BEAD map work or the rules work for some other reason, that program may be a better fit or a combination of the two. Next slide, please. So speaking of changing the map, one thing we, the state, have to do as part of our BEAD program implementation is establish a challenge process through which interested parties may submit evidence to change the status of a point on the map, whether from served to unserved, unserved to served, or correct other relevant characteristics. The challenge process will be part of the initial proposal we submit at the end of the year, so those program rules, and it's subject to approval by the NTIA, so they have to actually sign off on it. NTIA has provided a draft guidance document, which is available on their website and linked here, which includes a model challenge process that we can adopt in whole, or in part. We provided comments, which are available on our BEAD website, and urged NTIA to provide clarity in its final version of this guidance on the applicability of speed test data as evidence for challenges and on sharing location level fabric data with local partners and other interested parties so that communities can more fully participate in a challenge process and we can develop the best map possible. NTIA has not yet published a final version of that guidance and model challenge process, but it will do so soon, I expect. As I mentioned, we can adopt this model challenge process in whole or in part, and we're soliciting feedback from parties in the proceeding on how we should design our challenge process. I'll briefly describe what was in NTIA's draft model challenge process to give you a sense of what we might be thinking about, but bear in mind that this is a draft document and we're only using it as a potential starting point. So our challenge process will be developed in the public deliberative process. NTIA's model challenge process had several phases, beginning with publication of an initial map based on the latest version of the FCC's National Broadband Map. Then there's fielding eligible challenges from eligible challengers, which is a 30-day process. Then there's rebuttals by an internet service provider, although they can also say, we accept the challenge, so they can decline to submit a rebuttal. And finally, we, the CPUC, would adjudicate those challenges based on the evidence provided by both parties. Finally, once we've adjudicated all of our challenges, we have our map, we send that to the NTIA and say, here's how we adjudicated these challenges, and they have to approve the methodology that we used. So ultimately, we have a lot of discretion for setting the challenge process, but NTIA gets to decide what the final map looks like. The model challenge process contemplates this whole process from publication of the initial map to submission to NTIA as taking place over 75 days with 30 days to file those challenges after publication of the initial map. But the draft guidance does allow for up to 90 days for that challenge process. So either way, it's a pretty speedy process, but NTIA's model version would go a little faster than the maximum they allow. It's important to note that this challenge process can adjudicate the eligibility of individual locations, but it cannot adjudicate the fabric, meaning the point on a map. That is entirely set by the FCC's fabric, and we do not get to modify that. So you can flip locations, points, from served to unserved, or identify this point as a community anchor institution, but you can't say, actually, you missed a house here on this block. The point has to appear on the fabric in order to receive funding. So after the challenge process is concluded with NTIA's approval of our final map, then we may begin making grants subject to the restrictions on the first 20% of funding that I mentioned before. Or if we have submitted our final proposal by then, then we could make grants on the remaining 80% as well. Next slide. So a couple of other characteristics to consider for subgrantees. Affordability is one of the primary criteria that we can use to decide between projects in overlapping areas. And separately, the CPUC must include in our initial proposal what's called a middle class affordability plan to ensure that high quality broadband services are available to all middle class families in the BEAD funded network service area at reasonable prices. So obviously, there are several terms in here that we are going to have to define in the context of our proposal, including what is middle class, what's a reasonable price, what's a high quality broadband service. So those are items that we'll be considering through the proceeding, and we certainly welcome any input on how we should determine those items. But this is a little bit of a deeper level of affordability than we've been required to establish in other programs, going all the way to middle class households. As far as affordability, the BEAD rules state that we have to meet quality, the future ready requirements for technology, and we have to consider the recurring and the one-time costs when we're considering the cost to the household. So both the monthly costs and any installation costs. The middle class affordability plan is distinct from the requirement that also exists that subgrantees offer at least one low-cost broadband service option. So that would mean a plan with a specifically low cost that's affordable to low-income customers. They also have to advertise and promote low-cost options. So one thing the CPUC will be thinking about in developing this section of the initial proposal will have to be what constitutes advertising and promoting. How do we make sure that people eligible for low-cost options are aware of their options? So another item highlighted in the NOFO is climate resilience. This is identified as an item that we should consider in our initial proposal, but there hasn't been much guidance provided yet as to what that really is going to look like. In the NOFO, the federal government says we must account for weather and climate-related risks, and they specifically identify fire, extreme hot or cold temperatures, flooding, and extreme winds. But there may be other considerations, and that's an item that we'll consider in the rulemaking. The NOFO also references various federal databases and resources on quantifying these kinds of risks, locating them, and they mention a hazard screening that could be part of an application process, such as requiring projects constructed in high fire threat districts to meet higher standards of fire hardening or protecting infrastructure from sea level rise, as well as mentioning potential mitigation measures. So that's a question we'll be exploring in the proceeding. Given the severity of anticipated climate impacts here in California for all kinds of infrastructure, including internet, what is reasonable and appropriate to include as part of our process? I'll also just flag that the Commission has an active proceeding currently examining disaster preparedness and resiliency measures for facilities-based communications carriers. And we've issued two major decisions in that proceeding, one for wireline providers and one for wireless providers. One of the main requirements of those decisions is to deploy 72-hour backup power for facilities located in Tier 2 and Tier 3 high fire threat districts. So that's an example of the kind of policies we might be looking at in the proceeding as sort of a baseline. But I want to stress that that's only an example, and this is an item that would be decided through the public deliberative process of the rulemaking. Next slide, please. So workforce development is an issue that receives a lot of ink in the BEAD rules and guidance documents. with all this investment in a future-ready network, it's clear that there will be a need for a large amount of labor to perform skilled jobs, both in the construction process and later on in the actual maintenance and network operation phase of these projects. The BEAD NOFO states that subgrantees must ensure workforce will be appropriately skilled and credentialed, and that includes subcontractors. It also specifies that non-union workforce will be subject to additional reporting requirements. So union workforce is preferred, but non-union can be allowed based on current federal guidance. That said, the precise workforce and labor requirements for subgrantees is another issue that we anticipate being heavily litigated in our proceeding. So I can't say at this time what exact requirements will exist beyond what is specified in the federal NOFO. The NOFO also states that as part of our initial proposal, we need to describe how we will help develop a highly skilled workforce with equitable on-ramps into broadband careers. In other words, we're making a generational investment, and we want to make sure that the labor generated from this investment will benefit a broad array of Californians, including and especially those who have been excluded from previous opportunities. To facilitate this, the NOFO states that we can spend BEAD money on workforce development as a non-deployment use. However, as I noted at the top, we don't anticipate having much, if any, money left over for non-deployment uses at all. So while this will be a major focus of the program, we're looking for external partners at the community, local government levels, industry, unions, to come up with creative partnerships that will maximize the value of this investment for creating high-quality jobs and careers. Next slide, please. So a few other program considerations to highlight. I'm almost to the end of this section. So there is a required match as part of BEAD, and that's specified in the program rules at the federal level. So that's different from other CPUC grant programs where we've encouraged matches but not required them. However, the federal rules also state that you can use certain other federal funds as a matching to meet the matching requirements, such as ARPA money or other funding sources that were passed during the COVID pandemic. The specifics of how matching funds will work is an item that we anticipate being discussed heavily in the proceeding. Some more details to come. Middle mile may also be an eligible use of BEAD funds, but as I'll mention in the FFA program section, the focus here is last mile connections. So middle mile is specifically considered eligible where it's, quote, necessary to reach interconnection points or otherwise ensure technical or financial feasibility, unquote. So basically, if you need middle mile in order to make last mile connections feasible, then it could be an allowable use. But purely middle mile based projects are probably not going to receive funding. There's also some basic nuts and bolts type questions we'll need to answer in the proceedings, like in a proceeding such as, how to ensure managerial or financial competence of applicants, how to establish a project location level, how the application cycle should function, what the payment structure should be, and so on, as well as ministerial criteria and how to determine what to do when we have overlapping projects. So there's a lot that's going on in this proceeding. And next slide, please. So before I wrap up this section of the presentation, move on to the Q&A, I want to highlight some upcoming steps in the rulemaking, which is the vehicle through which we'll be developing the rules of the program. I want to encourage everyone here to consider becoming a party in the proceeding if you haven't already, because that enables you to file comments and make your voice heard in the development of this program. We know that there will be a wide range of circumstances and needs for this money, and we want to be as inclusive as possible in the kinds of high quality projects we fund to close the digital divide. But in order to do that, we need feedback from folks like you that are on the ground and thinking about what concrete projects will actually work for your communities. Currently, we're finishing up the local regional engagements, as I mentioned. We want to incorporate the feedback we've received at these workshops into the record of this proceeding so that it can be a basis for ultimately making decisions and crafting policy. We're working on drafting the 5-year action plan, which will be transmitted to NTIA in August. As mentioned, we're planning to issue that plan for public comment prior to transmittal, so look for that sometime in mid-July. In parallel with the NTIA process, the administrative law judge in the BEAD proceeding will be issuing a scoping memo in the coming weeks to identify specific issues in the proceeding, the timeline for resolving them, and how any additional comment will be taken. The CPUC will be working on developing program rules via the deliberative process that'll be spelled out in the scoping memo. So that's going towards submitting our initial proposal to NTIA by the end of 2023. Prior to submitting the formal initial proposal to NTIA, we plan to post a draft version for public comment later this year, likely sometime in October or November. After the initial proposal is submitted, we'll work with NTIA to get it approved, after which we'll finalize the program rules via commission vote. We'll run the challenge process and we'll begin awarding grants, hopefully sometime in mid-2024, while working on the final proposal to get the remaining funds available for grants. To follow along, like I said, I recommend becoming a party in the proceeding or just following rulemaking 2302.016. Alternatively, you can keep up with our website for BEAD, which is linked here. And NTIA also has a useful BEAD website that has extensive resources, all the guidance they've provided. And finally, please reach out with any questions to regarding BEAD at this email address, bead@cpuc.ca.gov, which is our dedicated inbox for this program. Next slide. Yes. So that brings us to our Q&A. I think I turn this back to you now.
Hey, Ben.
Thank you.
I'll be asking you the questions. Hope, is there anything we need to know or move on to questions? Okay.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Ben, for all that information on BEAD. That was a lot of details, and there's a lot of questions. And just so everybody knows, this recording of this presentation and the slides will be available on the CPUC website, and we'll be posting that link periodically in the chat. Yeah, let's go ahead and ask some of these questions, Ben. So first question. So this person's saying that they perform automated network design as part of their LATA grant feasibility analysis. They want to know if they can gain access to the FFA applicant tool underlying address level data to include the availability of status of each location, so the served, underserved, unserved. And if so, who would they ask for that access to that?
That's probably a question that I'm going to have to direct you to the folks on our FFA team for follow-up. Broadly, the applicant tool is intended to be for folks who will actually be filing applications for the federal funding account. And so, not knowing your specific circumstance, if that describes you, then yes. If not, there may be a way, if you have partners who are potential applicants, to get that same information. But my contact information should be a part of this presentation. Please feel free to, please just reach out with that question. I can get you a more specific answer.
Thanks, Ben. Another question. So the FFA applicant tool provides an estimated subsidy needed for each census block. How reliable is that number? And can you comment on the network investment numbers as well?
Sure. So that the estimated investment per location is generated from that investment model that I referenced earlier in the slides that was developed in partnership with CostQuest Associates. And it relies on proprietary industry data on the cost of building other fiber networks, and specifically considers the cost of deploying greenfield networks. So it doesn't assume the reuse of existing infrastructure that would probably in reality be part of constructing a network. You wouldn't just construct a new network entirely out of whole cloth. So that said, those are estimates. And so estimates are always going to have uncertainty attached to them. And particularly, I think when you get into some of the more remote, rural, challenging topographies, there's so much that goes into those costs that is impossible to determine at a 50,000 foot view. So those are estimates. We developed them in large part to give us as the commission a baseline to understand when we receive projects, are the costs that are being requested reasonable? Are they within the realm of possibility? And if not, that doesn't mean that the costs are unreasonable. It could mean that our model is wrong, but then we have a basis to begin that conversation. So like I said, those are estimates, they're starting points, but we do know that in some ways that data may be flawed.
Thanks, Ben. Another question. So who at the CPUC can somebody contact if their jurisdiction has questions regarding the FFA application rules and procedures?
So I think, we do have a caseworker team that is intended to help work specifically with applicants with local jurisdictions to provide some of that technical assistance and get applications over the finish line. So I can provide the contact information for that team. I don't have it right in front of me, but I'll have that before my next section of the presentation. But more broadly, feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I think my email is part of this presentation, and I'd be happy to direct you to the folks within the CPUC who can get you specific answers if I'm not able to answer myself.
Thank you, Ben. Do you expect the BEAD availability status, served, unserved, or underserved, for all locations to match the availability status in the federal funding account applicant tool? Or do you expect location and status differences between the FCC National Broadband Map and the FFA tool map?
Well, we do expect that there would be a lot of similarities because the fabric that we used to build the FFA map is the same. So we tried to harmonize, given that we have all of these different maps circulating, and we tried to use the same underlying data as much as possible. But that said, there are different criteria for all of those maps. So, and there's different cadences at which that data is updated. So I could say in general, yes, but there will definitely be specific locations where they don't match up. And I'll say a little bit more about the FFA map later, but in brief, the map itself is also, the public map in particular, is a starting point, but we know that that data could be flawed, and so it's not the end point. And we do encourage folks to submit applications for locations that you have evidence and knowledge that they are unserved. Feel free to include those in your applications.
Great, thank you. Somebody's asking if the 5-year action plan is available for review. Sounds like to come later. Yes,
to come. We are working on it now at a rapid pace, but we are anticipating posting it for public comment 30 days before we submit it to NTIA. So that'll be available on our website certainly, and circulated through the proceeding as well. So middle of July.
Next question. So does a union workforce equate equitable workforce?
That's a very interesting question. There's certainly a lot of history underlying it. I'd say I can't say specifically because both of those items are going to be issues in the proceeding, determining what those terms actually mean and how they interact with each other. My reading of the federal guidance is that those are related but separate terms. So union workforce is preferred and equitable workforce development is a priority, and the two do mesh in certain ways, but union workforce would be necessary, but perhaps not sufficient in all cases. But again, that's a preceding item.
Thanks, Ben. I have a few more questions here. Hope let us know when we're at time. The next question is, will all subgrantees be required to use the SB 156 middle mile as a stipulation of a last mile BEAD grant?
So that's another item that's being considered in the proceeding. So I don't have a specific answer yet.
Okay. where an entity has requested a meeting with a broadband internet caseworker, what is the turnaround time for those type of requests?
That's a great question, and our intention is to be as speedy as possible. I don't know exactly, but I think that they're trying to meet those requests, within a matter of a couple of weeks at the most. I do know that team they've been getting staffed up, so we're building the plane as we're trying to fly it. But definitely, if you've reached out and you've not gotten a response, or you're having trouble getting a meeting set out, please feel free to email me, and I will do my best to expedite that.
Okay, just gonna do 2 more questions here, Ben, and then we'll save any other questions for our Q&A at the end. How do I determine whether my city is unserved, underserved, or served?
So that will be a question of, so first of all, unserved, underserved, and served is based on the location level. So it's not a matter of the city as a whole. It's individual locations are determined to be served, unserved, or underserved based on the speeds available of the deployed infrastructure at that location. And that will be a determination in the context of BEAD that'll be based on the map that we developed specifically for the BEAD program, because there are specific characteristics that go into that definition for awarding BEAD grants. Since that map isn't available yet, because we haven't finished the rulemaking process and we haven't approved a challenge process and all of that, your best bet is to look at our existing maps, which are the federal funding account map would be the most recent one, or our California Interactive Broadband map, which do show data on the served status of locations. Given that the speed thresholds are similar, that's going to provide a good proxy for what areas of your city are served, unserved, or underserved.
Last question for this Q&A session, Ben. So what is the final cutoff date for jurisdictions to submit community-sourced broadband availability data to inform California's BEAD funding implementation?
I think that's a question that I can't answer at this time, because it's part of the challenge process, which will be developed through the rulemaking. I'll say that at the federal level, there are different deadlines, and I would have to check those to determine if there is a timeline for updating the FCC's fabric. But there will be, I would anticipate that there will be some form of data collection by the PUC to develop our initial BEAD map. And then subsequently, there will be that challenge process where there will be an opportunity to provide evidence that the status of locations on the map are not correct.
Okay, thanks so much, Ben. So we're going to wrap up our Q&A for this portion of the webinar. Any questions that we were not able to answer right now, we're going to try to come back to those at the end of the webinar, where we'll have a general Q&A. So please feel free to keep posting those questions. And Hope, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Hector. Next slide. Okay, so thank you, Ben. That was a great discussion on the BEAD program. And like Hector said, we can address any additional BEAD questions in the final Q&A at the end of all the presentations. But for now, I'd like to introduce Cole Prizabella. Cole is the Senior Advisor at the California Department of Technology, where he focuses on broadband access and deployment. His focus is driving large stakeholder initiatives like the State Digital Equity Plan and finding ways to enhance deployment processes by breaking down permitting barriers, sharing funding opportunities, and building digital navigation programs to expand broadband connectivity across California. Welcome, Cole.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you, California Public Utilities Commissions, for putting on this webinar today on the funding opportunities and allowing an opportunity for California Department of Technology to also share about the State Digital Equity Plan. Next slide. As Ben stated, CDT is the administrating entity over the Digital Equity Plan, and that's in concert with the California Public Utilities Commission, who's doing the BEAD program. Our planning processes are coordinated, and if you've joined us for a regional local event, like we'll share in a little bit, you've seen that there's extensive coordination and cooperation across the statewide effort. When completed, hopefully our plan will unlock hundreds of millions of additional dollars to achieve broadband for all through the state digital equity plan. And as of yet, we have not had a response on our allocation like BEAD yet. So we are still working through our state digital equity plan to get to that understanding of what the allocation will be for digital equity planning and capacity grants. Next slide. One of the things that we'd really like to remind and cover is that the digital equity plan is really covering and understanding where the historical underserved and underserved populations are. And specifically, there's covered populations that are required through the digital equity planning process and BEAD planning process. Specifically, digital equity has 8 covered populations, included in the dark blue, like those in covered households or aging individuals, members of racial and ethnic minority groups. But specifically, there are 2 that are called out for the BEAD notice of funding opportunity, which is women and LGBTQI+. We covered populations in all aspects of the state digital equity plan when it comes to the 5 components of the next slide. Next slide. And so how has the state digital equity planning approach been working, and how are we looking to complete it? There are 5 components. There's the statewide planning group, which is a board that is very similar to the California Broadband Council, but really expands the co-chairs and the subject matter expertise. The statewide planning group is a group that meets quarterly and has 21 plus agencies across the state, both state representative and community-based organizations of subject matter experts in the broadband field. Additionally, we have 6 outcome area working groups, and these are both held virtually. The outcome area working groups are about health, education, workforce and economic development, essential services, tribal collaboration, and digital literacy and inclusion. Additionally, as of 2 days from now, so Friday, we will have the California Digital Equity Survey close. I look forward to sharing a little bit more on the survey in the next coming slides. And then additionally, as Ben stated, there are regional planning workshops. We've actually held our final 20th in-person regional planning workshop with the tribal collaboration in the southern region as of yesterday, and held 17 regional planning workshops across the state in local jurisdictional regions with community-based organizations and your local governments, all the way up from Eureka and Redding down to San Diego and across. And as we move forward, you'll see there's continued opportunities for statewide public engagement, very similar to a lot of the PUC was sharing about public comment periods and opportunities to really find out what's next with the planning digital equity plan. Next slide. So here's our California State Digital Equity Planning timeline. Back in November is when we started to do kickoff and engagement and understanding of where we'll head with the state digital equity planning and what to and when we received the funding to start. We are now in our data gathering phase, and in fact wrapping up that data gathering phase so that we can start to really draft the plan and go out to public comment late summer with a goal of August to September, because in the state digital equity planning NOFO in our timeline, we are due to return a final state digital equity plan to the NTIA in November of this year. And with the return in of the state digital equity plan, that's when we kind of start to do the next steps of continuing to hold outcome area working groups, held statewide planning groups, and really understand how we get to the next phase of implementing the digital equity plan and what we've learned across the state through these regional planning groups, and understanding the barriers and the strategies that we're seeing across the state, and understanding that there's unique barriers and some commonalities across the state. Next slide. So really the big call to action and the thing that we really want to stress at this moment is the state digital equity plan is survey is wrapping up. We have 2 days left for your communities, your household to share your opinions, your voice, your barriers in the digital equity survey. It's a really exciting and accessible survey. We've seen an amazing turnout. I'm happy to preliminary share that we potentially are getting up to the 30,000 response level. And it's a really strong cross section of understanding the covered populations in the state of California, and understanding that there's also really strong turnout from counties across the urban and metropolitan and rural area. And I think it's really key to the fact that it's a really an accessible survey. You can see here that it's in 14 different languages, and very unique to the state of California at this point in the survey is auto functionality, so that even if you have low literacy levels, you can turn on the audio and be able to respond to the survey, and have it's mobile friendly, excuse me. Next slide. This is a reiteration of the 14 languages, and more importantly, that there are a QR code to access the survey. There is a URL to access the survey. And if you are a partner looking to both share the digital equity survey and or share out on social media or through an email newsletter, we have toolkits. So please, I'll put my email in the chat. And send our team an email. We will absolutely love to get you not only social media content or email newsletters in English, but also in language. So we have collateral in language. And additionally, if we share out information in language, we can also share the link to the digital equity survey in language as well. And if you wanted to do that yourself, you could go to the digital equity survey, choose a drop-down language, and that URL will be unique to that language. And I just noticed in the chat, there was a question about the survey link. It is now in the link. Thank you, Anne. Next slide. Finally, digital equity plan will have a comment period. We really look forward to and inviting and understanding if we've done it right. Did we hear what you shared at the regional local events? Did we hear and understand the barriers that you shared at the outcome area working groups? And did we also hear and share what your organization's doing through the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool about your organization's success in really delivering digital navigation, digital literacy, digital adoption, devices across the state of California? Because we understand and we know the state of California and your organizations have been doing digital equity and have been doing digital navigation programs for a long time. And so we want to make sure we're not only accurately representing the successes that we've had across the state, but we're also understanding and sharing the barriers that you've shared with us, and also putting out recommendations and ways that we can all move together forward and implement through the state digital equity plan. So I believe that's my last slide. I do want to share one final note that is outside of the state digital equity plan. Considering this is a funding opportunities webinar, really wanted to also share that the Broadband for All portal under the Partners tab has a funding tool where you can go as an organization, a nonprofit, an ISP, and say kind of who you are, if you're looking for deployment, adoption, what kind of funding you're looking for, and we'll have a drop down of all the different funding opportunities that are current at this point across federal, state opportunities. And that is now in the chat as well. So that's the end of my slide. I'd be happy to take any questions if we have them.
Thanks, Cole. It looks like the couple questions we got, Anne was on top of it answering. So thank you so much for providing the links and the information to connect and get involved. But that is it. We'll give people a few seconds here if you have any questions. Otherwise, if you have questions for, we got a question right here, but if you have any questions for Cole, we will be coming back to questions that were unanswered at the end of the webinar. So, but here's a question, Cole. Can you confirm there are only 2 days left to submit the survey?
Correct. Yeah. So when we released the survey, we put out a deadline of June 30th. And at this time, due to response, a really good covered population cross-sampling and response, we do intend to close the survey on Friday.
Okay. And we're getting a couple of questions here. So we have evidence that 4,500 urban locations identified as unserved on the federal funding account applicant tool map are confirmed served by one or more wireline providers, Comcast and AT&T Fiber. On the national broadband map and ISP websites, we don't want to spend our local area technical assistance fund planning networks to serve these locations when they are sure to be challenged by incumbent ISP somewhere in the application process. Any suggestions on how we should approach this dilemma?
Yeah, so this sounds like a Ben Menzies question that be happy to defer to Ben to answer. Ben, just real quickly, I did see that there was a question about outcome area working groups that I'd like to just respond real quickly about that. The majority of the outcome area working groups as it relates to the state digital equity plan and in informing the plan itself by talking about barriers and successes in those outcome area workings, those have wrapped. We do have one last tribal collaboration potential meeting in an outcome area working group, but really we're now moving and changing our focus to the opportunity and providing feedback during the public comment period. So we're looking at how the outcome area working groups live on, but as of now, those have wrapped. So Ben, to you potentially if you want to answer FFA or answer later.
Sure, I'll just give a brief answer because I may be missing some details here, but if you have knowledge that locations that are identified as unserved on the FFA map are actually served, I wouldn't submit an application for those locations. So I may be missing some context here, and I recommend either reaching out to the caseworker team or to me directly, and maybe we can have a more detailed conversation. But I'd recommend designing projects, applications that target unserved locations.
Thanks, Ben. Another question. So will maps be released to show where the 10 covered populations are located?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and one that we're actively kind of deciding on how and what is included in the state digital equity plan, and both how we represent the strong responses of the information that we've received through the state digital equity plan. One of the things that we've really been able to do is not only dive down to zip code responses, but yeah, where the covered populations are responding from. So can't answer yes or no, but I do know that one of the things we're going to be understanding is that's potentially an idea of how we can represent the data.
Thanks, Cole. Is the Dean tool also closing June 30th?
No, we would love to continue to hear from organizations across the state through the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool. And if you could also drop that link into the chat, that would be great. This one's a little bit less of a response in terms of really trying to analyze a lot of information. So we are extending and also allowing more time for organizations to respond to the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool.
Thanks for spelling out that acronym.
Yeah.
What is the planned timeline for counties to apply for funding? The times show the submittals at the federal level.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. Again, as we wrap up the state digital equity plan, really our focus is that. And with the wrap up of the state digital equity plan, then we can start to turn on our next phase, which is understanding how to implement the state digital equity plan. And that includes also understanding what is our allocation for capacity grants, how those capacity grants are then funded out to then implement the strategies that were in the state digital equity plan. So from Monterey County, don't have an answer yet. Understand that our state digital equity plan is due in November. And as we move from plan to implementation, we will have lots of workshops, outcome area working groups, and/or meetings to really share and kind of supply an answer on when to start to actually apply and/or start talking about how capacity grant funds will be used.
Thanks, Cole. Last question. So is the survey required?
No, I don't think the survey is required. I'm sorry, it took me a second to kind of think about that, but no, nothing. Participation is not required. It's always encouraged, right? We would love for everyone and anyone, if we could get 40 million responses across the state, that would be outstanding. But no, the survey participation is not required, but highly encouraged.
Thanks, Cole. Hope, turn it back to you.
Thank you. Next slide. So thank you, Cole. That was another informative presentation and Q&A session. And in case attendees missed it, we dropped links in the chat to the Digital Equity Public Survey, the Broadband Funding Opportunities Tool, and the DEAM tool. Now I'd like to welcome back Ben Menzies to cover some additional programs.
Thanks, Hector, and thanks very much to Cole for providing that presentation. So now I'm going to move on to some of our other broadband funding programs that'll be getting money out the door a little sooner than BEAD and maybe better fits for certain kinds of projects or complementary projects. Next slide, please. So I'm going to touch on all of these programs in the next two sections, first discussing the Last Mile Federal Funding Account, which we usually call the Federal Funding Account, or FFA. And part of that program is the Local Agency Technical Assistance Program, which it sounds like we have some awardees here in the chat today, which is great. That program provided pre-construction funding for local agencies interested in deploying broadband. Unfortunately, as of this week, that program is completely subscribed, so I'm not going to discuss it at length, but hopefully some folks on the call today may have had good experiences with using those funds for pre-construction broadband activities. After the FFA section, I'll pause for questions, and then I'll get into our suite of California Advanced Services Fund programs, which are our long-standing grant programs and provide a smaller amount of funding for a wider range of digital divide-related activities. Next slide, please. And next. So for the Last Mile Federal Funding Account, this was established as part of SB 156 in 2021, and it allocated $2 billion for last mile broadband infrastructure using a combination of federal and state funds. It's kind of a misnomer actually now, because this account is mostly state funds at this point due to some budget changes, but there is still a significant amount of federal funds in there. This is split evenly between urban and rural counties. So 50% for urban counties and 50% for rural counties, which was subject that split is in the statute, but then the determination of which counties count as urban or rural was made by a subsequent commission decision. And that means that each county was given an actual allocation of funds laid out in Commission Decision 22-04055. That was based on a formula of $5 million per county to start, plus each county's share of households without access to 100 megabits per second reliable broadband service as of our data at the end of 2021. The key takeaway here is that counties are not competing with each other for money. The scoring criteria that have been established and that I'll get into in a minute are about allocating funds within counties to the highest value projects. So a few weeks ago, we released application guidance and an applicant tool, which is available on our website at the link here. There is also a specific eligibility map, which I'll get into on the next slides a bit. And the application will open very soon. From what I've heard as recently as yesterday, we are all set for this Friday, the 30th to open, which is really exciting because we've been working very hard to get this application open. Once it opens, the application will be open for 3 months. As I mentioned, the applications will be scored by staff based on the criteria established in Decision 22-04055. Those criteria are spelled out in a little bit more detail in the Appendix A of that decision. And there's also a scoring rubric available on our website as part of the applicant guidance I referenced, which gets very specific about how points will be awarded. All of those items are linked here. Next slide, please. So I wanted to dig into that application criteria in greater detail. These criteria were established by Commission decision, as I mentioned, and reflected the Commission's interest in funding projects that are not simply serving unserved communities, but also delivering related public benefits. As I mentioned, points are allocated to projects to direct funding to the highest bang for buck projects and the communities with the greatest need. So there are 130 points available in total, and you can see the point amounts for each category here. So I'll break these down in a little bit more detail, and this detail is largely based on the scoring rubric I referenced earlier. So go ahead and refer to that if you have, if you need more information in the future. So the first 10 points is for the percentage of matching funds in the application. So this is not a match requirement, but it is encouraged because we want to make these funds go as far as possible. You get 1 point for every 10% of matching funds as part of the project. So for example, an application with matching funds equivalent to 60% of the requested subsidy would get 6 points. The next category is the use of fiber technology, and this is 1 point awarded for every 10% of for every 10% of the project area. Next is the public and/or tribal applicant category. You get 1 point for every 5% ownership share by a local government, a tribal entity, a nonprofit, etc. The next categories I've kind of grouped together here, and these are offering lifeline, pricing commitments, or a low-cost plan of $40 a month for 50 down, 20 upload speeds. So that's 10 points, 10 points, and 20 points, respectively. These categories are all or nothing, so it's a yes or no. Either you get these points or you don't, based on whether you offer lifeline, whether you offer a pricing commitment to freeze prices for a period of, I believe it's 10 years, or a low-cost plan at the amounts quoted. So the next category is whether the project serves disadvantaged communities or low-income customers. There's 20 points available in this category, and these 20 points will be awarded in full, again, all or nothing, for any application where greater than 50% of the unserved locations in the application fall into one of the two categories based on socioeconomic indicators, which are shown on the FFA map. And I'll get into that in a little more detail on the next slide. These essentially relate to median household income and disadvantaged communities as determined by the SB 535 criteria. There will be no partial awarding of points, as I mentioned. If the percentage is less than or equal to 50%, then you don't get the points, and if it's greater, then you do. And as I mentioned before, each county has an allocation. So this is not a category that's about allocating funds between counties. It's only within counties. The next category here, I've sort of grouped together again. We have applicant capacity and then project planning and feasibility, which is actually referred to in the decision as technology, network, and budget. So there are points within the applicant capacity category that'll be awarded as follows. You get 4 points if the applicant or a contractor has significant experience in infrastructure or broadband construction projects, and you can get partial credit for moderate experience. And then there's 3 points available, so we're up to 7 in this category, if the applicant has clarified where startup and gap funding to get the project started and carry over the reimbursements will come from. And then there's an additional 3 points for reaching all unserved households within the proposed service area. So that's 10 points for the applicant capacity category. For the technology, network, and budget category, the points will be awarded as follows. 4 points for displaying adequate upload and download speeds at the household level to meet existing demand. and you can get partial points. You can get 2 points for 100 speeds, so that's 100 symmetrical, or 4 if it's gigabit. You can get 4 points in this category if you have a complete budget with itemized cost estimates, so equipment, permits, lease equipments, etc. And you can get another 2 points if you have one or more of the following: extra bandwidth capacity beyond what's needed to permit expansion bigger than gigabit speeds, if your budget contains information about the useful life of components in the proposed system, or you have detailed construction plans or network specifications included within the application. And then finally, there's a category for leveraging the statewide middle mile. I know that was a question about BEAD earlier. In the context of FFA, this is a yes or no. If your project proposes to connect to the statewide middle mile within reasonable proximity, you get 10 points. So again, I want to mention that these points are for application scoring, so allocation of funds within counties, but any awards are premised on final agreement and negotiation with project partners. So if there are problems with applications that are discovered during the process, we may make modifications. This is not running on autopilot. Next slide, please. So the FFA has a specific eligibility map identifying locations that are presumed eligible, as I've mentioned. These locations were determined based on deployment data obtained from providers and validated against confidential subscriber data at the census block level. That means that as much as possible, we've tried to identify locations as unserved, even when a provider claimed to serve them, if there was no subscriber at the census block, generally suggesting that deployment was overstated. However, we recognize that the map is just a model. And one thing that I learned in graduate school is that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So we know that this data is flawed and may not reflect reality on the ground. For that reason, if you believe locations in your community are unserved, but that is not reflected on the public map, that should not deter you from submitting applications including those locations, while providing as much detail as possible on why you believe those locations are unserved. The FFA map also has 2 layers denoting areas that count towards the points for existing broadband need, as I referenced in the previous slide. So those include disadvantaged communities, which are based on the criteria for SB 535 via Cal EnviroScreen 4.0, and low-income communities, which is based on median household income. These are census block groups with median household income at or below 80% of either the state median income or the county median income, if the county median income is higher than state median income. And in lieu of those 2, all 20 points would be awarded to any application by a tribal entity as defined in the FFA program rules. So a tribal entity that applies will get the 20 points regardless. The applicant tool has more detailed information on location status. The public map only gets you to a hex level due to the license restrictions. But if you register through the applicant tool, you can see individual locations and their served status. Next slide, please. So the purpose of those 2 layers that I mentioned are to capture 2 distinct kinds of need, knowing that some region of the state have no disadvantaged communities as calculated by the SB 535 methodology, while others have tons. And these 2 screenshots from the public map are intended to show how these 2 layers capture different communities with different kinds of need. One in Fresno on the left, which has a high number of disadvantaged communities as determined by SB 535. And you can see on the orange layer here, all of that is SB 535 disadvantaged community. So all of those red hexes on the falling within the layer, those are presumed unserved locations, so presumed eligible. And if it's within the orange area, it is part of a disadvantaged community. So a project that serves 50% or more of the locations within that project fall within that orange, that would receive the 20 points in that category. On the right, I show Windsor, California, which is in Sonoma County. And in that part of the state, there's not very many SB 535 disadvantaged communities. So the low income layer is a better metric for determining that need. And just a note about the map, the hexes denote the number of unserved locations. So darker is more than 10 unserved locations within that hex. The sort of middle amount of darkest is 3 to 10 locations, and the lightest hexes are 1 to 2 unserved locations. Again, that's an artifact of the public map. On the applicant tool, you can see the individual locations, but we have to protect that per the license agreement on the public map. Next slide, please. So this table shows some of the map differences between the various programs. I don't want to get into this in too much detail because I think I've already described a lot of this in words, but this may be a helpful slide to refer to if you have questions. But one of the main things to take away here is that for the context of the FFA map, the technology that was determined to identify locations as served did not include fixed wireless providers, DSL, or older versions of cable, whereas for the FCC's map used to determine the BEAD allocation, or the FCC's map, the National Broadband map, as well as our California Advanced Services map, that does include those technologies for the purposes of determining served status. The other thing to highlight is that for FFA and CISF, we do engage in some validation in order to try and improve the data submitted by providers, whereas the FCC's map largely does not. Next slide, please. And then similarly, this is a table showing some programmatic differences between the various programs. Again, I think I've described a lot of this in passing, but it may be a useful comparison between the different programs. One of the main things that I just want to highlight is the matching requirements that for CASF, there's no matching requirement. For the federal funding account, there's a match that is encouraged, but not required. So you'll receive those points if you have matches. And then, of course, for BEAD, there's the 25% match subject to the rules laid out in the NOFO and what will be determined through the proceeding. The other thing to note is that for the application timetable, the federal funding account in the middle here, our application will open at the end of June, as I mentioned. For BEAD, it's still TBD, so we're working to get that rolling as soon as possible. And then for CASF's infrastructure grant account, which I'll describe a little bit in the next section, unfortunately, that application window has passed for this year. So that was on June 1st of 2023. So if you're interested in applying for that account, I would recommend working on an application for next year. We're currently working on reviewing the applications that were submitted prior to June 1. Next slide, please. Okay, Q&A.
Hey, Ben, thanks again for all that information. We do have some questions, so let's jump into them. So is there going to be a new round of funding for the Broadband Consortia grant?
That is a good question. I believe so. So that's one of the CASF programs that I'll get into in a bit. But it looks like the application window for that program this year has closed. So that was another June 1st one. So there would be another window later.
Thanks, Ben. Fixed wireless is eligible for FFA funding. This person was told it was wireline only, or do the points for using fiber refer to fiber versus coax/copper?
So that's a complicated question. The FFA rules as established do not directly address wireless. So I would recommend reaching out to our caseworker team to discuss your project in greater detail if you're planning on using wireless technology. The fiber preference is, the fiber points in the FFA criteria are intended to award points to fiber as distinguished from cable, but also there is a preference for fiber in the FFA application process.
Great, thanks. And we have posted the contact information in the chat for the caseworker team, and we'll repost that for you all. The next question, how does a socioeconomic vulnerability index correlate with disadvantaged community criteria?
So the socioeconomic vulnerability index is a subset of the criteria used to establish the disadvantaged community status. That appears on the FFA map as an information-only layer, and it was one of the layers that we were considering for awarding the existing broadband service need points at an earlier phase in the process. As part of the way disadvantaged communities are determined for SB 535, the criteria, the factors that go into socioeconomic vulnerability index are part of that, but then there are also other criteria relating to environmental exposure and population characteristics. So rely on the disadvantaged communities layer, not the SEVI layer, for the purpose of determining which points you would get.
Thank you, Ben. Can you challenge the map where the data looks inaccurate? As an example, as it shows there's a need, but there isn't a need. This person is pointing to the examples of where new developments might be occurring.
There is an objection process as part of applications as they'll be filed through the FFA application portal. So over the next 3 months, prior to any grant, projects that have been proposed will be posted publicly, and there will be an opportunity to challenge or to object to those applications if you have evidence that the locations are currently served. So that is basically the process for challenging those. What I will say is that, as I indicated above, this process is not going on autopilot. So we do not intend to award funding for locations that are already served. That's what I can say at this point.
Great, thank you, Ben. How will the 3-month window work for evaluating / prioritizing applications? Will the application window need to close before the whole of applications can be considered for award?
Yes, because there's a specific amount of funding for each county, we won't be making grant awards prior to the end of the application because we'll need to score all of the applications before making those awards to make sure that projects that are funded are among the highest scoring ones proposed.
Okay, could you clarify your earlier statement about the amount of FFA funding for each county? This person heard that all funds would be awarded by formula by county, so that the competition for funds would be within county versus statewide. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there are specific county allocations that are spelled out in the decision that I referenced, 22-04055. There may be small changes to those county allocations due to the awarding of LATA grants because those came out of the same pool. But that's $50 million out of the $2 billion total. So the changes would be pretty minor.
Okay. Last question. Will the FFA build timeline completion date be extended due to funding source changes?
So that's a complicated question. Basically, part of the reason that the funding sources were changed was to maximize the amount of time available to expend these funds so that we didn't run into a situation where projects that had been awarded funds were unable to complete construction due to the federal timelines associated with those funds. So the short answer is that we intend to award federal funds upfront quickly so that we can get those funds out the door and expended prior to the end of 2026 deadline for those federal funds. For the state funds that are part of the federal funding account, those don't have a timeline associated with them as far as I'm aware. And so we obviously we'll be getting the money out as quickly as possible, and we want to get these projects completed. But they're not subject to the same encumbrance and expenditure deadlines as the ARPA funds that were the original primary portion of the FFA.
Great. Thanks, Ben. We do have a few questions that were not answered. If we have time at the end of the webinar, we'll circle back to those. But we can go ahead and keep going with the webinar.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me through this whole webinar. Next slide, please. So lastly, I'm going to get into our California Advanced Services Fund programs. Next slide, please. These CASF programs are our long-standing, sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. These are our long-standing grant programs. They've been around since the program as a whole has been around since 2008, although some of the accounts have been opened more recently than that. And it's a suite of sub-programs to address the digital divide. These include infrastructure deployment, coordination between entities, and adoption activities. The funding for this program comes from a surcharge on telephone bills. And so it's a much smaller pool of money than either BEAD or the federal funding account, which is one reason why we're so excited about those other sources of funding. But it is a useful form of funding for certain kinds of projects as well. Recent statutory changes as part of the SB 156 process increased the amount of surcharge revenue that we're allowed to bring in to fund these programs. And the revenue is divided among all of the sub-programs through an annual allocation established by commission vote. So that the allocation for 23-24, fiscal year 23-24, was just recently approved. So that budget is available on our website. And currently we're bringing in about $73 million annually for this program to sort of replenish the budgets for the individual sub-programs. But the statute does allow us to increase that amount to $150 million. However, we want to be really judicious about increasing surcharges to customers. So it's a balancing act between the amount of need that we see for expending these programs with also wanting to minimize the surcharge costs to customers. So if we were to increase that surcharge amount and increase the amount of money going into CASF programs, there would be a formal notice prior to that. So don't anticipate that imminently. These programs use their own eligibility map, so it's distinct from the FFA map, although we've tried to harmonize the data sources used as much as possible, as I mentioned earlier. That's the California Interactive Broadband map, and we have a screenshot here on the right, which looks a little different than the FFA. The red dots on this map are what we call priority eligible locations. And this is for the purpose of the infrastructure grant account, which I'll just mention a few details about on the next slide. But basically those dots represent locations where serve speeds are below 10 download or lapse service at all. Whereas the yellow dots are simply unserved, meaning locations where the speeds are lower than 25.3, which is the threshold for cert status, but above the 10.1 that I mentioned for priority. Next slide, please. So first, I want to get into a few of the programs that may be most relevant to this conversation. These include the adoption account, the infrastructure grant account, and the public housing account. The adoption account is intended to fund digital literacy, broadband access projects, can fund community outreach, call centers to increase broadband access and adoption. And so this is a program intended to put resources in the hands of community-based organizations or locals that are trying to increase digital literacy and digital skills necessary to actually use the infrastructure that has been deployed. And so There's a wide range of eligible organizations that can apply for these funds, including local governments, senior centers, libraries, nonprofits, community-based organizations. The application timeline for that program is a little more frequent than some of the other programs here. There's a deadline coming up on July 1st, and then the next one will be January 1st. There's a twice a year application cycle. The next program, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is our infrastructure grant account. And for a long time, this was our primary program for funding infrastructure deployment. This funds projects for costs directly related to deployment of infrastructure. So leasing access to property, internet backhaul services, provider upgrades, all of that. These projects can include both wireline and wireless technologies. So there's a pretty broad range of eligible technologies that can be used through projects funded through this account. As I mentioned, the application deadline for this program has closed for this year. So that occurred on June 1st. We anticipate doing another round of funding in the future. Likely on a similar timeline, but for now we're working through reviewing the applications we received, which was a huge number, and then ultimately making awards later this year. Finally, I want to mention the Broadband Public Housing Account, this account basically funds costs for upgrading internet infrastructure in public housing and low-income communities. Currently, that includes the costs to install inside wiring and broadband network equipment in these areas. Most recently, the eligibility for this account was expanded to include both publicly supported housing developments, which was what it previously included, and farm worker housing as well. So that is a new kind of grantee that would be eligible. And this also has a twice a year application cadence. So there's a deadline coming up on July 1st, and then subsequently there will be one on January 1st. I'll mention in a little more detail on a subsequent slide that we currently have a staff proposal out for comment on changes to the rules for this program that would basically expand further the eligible kinds of projects that can be funded through this account. And so I will get into that in a little more detail in a minute. Next slide, please. So some additional programs under the CASF umbrella that are a little bit more niche. There's the Regional Broadband Consortia Grant Account. There was a question about this earlier, and I appreciate the feedback from an audience member that I got it wrong. There was not a grant round for this year, but there, despite what this slide says, but there will probably be another grant round for this in the future. This program funds coordination. Specifically, it funds regional broadband consortia that exist throughout the state to basically convene stakeholders and entities within a given region to generate projects that will close the digital divide in California. These consortia are a really great resource for anyone looking for technical assistance, advice, convening support, all these kinds of things. There's probably one in your area, although there are a few regions of the state that don't have a consortia. And those include local and regional governments, public safety, schools, healthcare, libraries, all kinds of entities that are working to close the digital divide in their communities. The next program here is the Line Extension Program. And this is basically a program designed to fund an individual connection to the broadband, to the broader internet network, where there's a single household way up on a hill that isn't connected. That would be the kind of project that could be funded through this account. Although we did recently provide funding for the extension of a line to a specific farm worker community in San Gerardo, which was exciting. So there are some niche uses for this account, but if you're interested, I'd recommend consulting the website, which I have links to later in this presentation. Those applications can be submitted at any time until the funds are exhausted, so there's not a specific application cadence. Finally, I'll mention our Tribal Technical Assistance Program, and this is similar to the LATA program that I briefly mentioned earlier within the FFA, but it's specific to tribal governments, and it can fund up to $150,000 per tribe per fiscal year for market studies, feasibility studies, basically pre-construction activities to bring broadband to a tribal community. California tribes with or without federal recognition are eligible to apply, but you must demonstrate tribal leadership support for the application. And again, those applications can be submitted at any time until the funds are exhausted. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, I did want to highlight the public housing account because we recently issued a revised staff proposal to make some changes to the rules for this account. There was a previous staff proposal issued last year that we received a bunch of helpful feedback on. So this most recent staff proposal went out in April. It includes proposals to expand eligibility to locations like mobile home parks, tribal housing, multi-dwelling buildings with primarily low-income residents. It has a definition of low income that you can see here, which is a little bit broader than some of the other definitions. The staff proposal contemplates allowing funding of internet extension projects, so more than just the inside wiring, but actually connecting household buildings to the broader internet network, which has been an obstacle for some of these projects. And it also would raise the per unit cap of the cost per unit cap for ministerial review. So the staff proposal comments were already due in May. So you can review that staff proposal, but the comments have already been received. And we anticipate a proposed decision being issued sometime later this year in the CASF proceeding. And so if you want to comment on that, please become a party to that proceeding, and there will be another opportunity to comment before that is established as a final decision. As this bullet states, if we did adopt those new rules based on the staff proposal, the earliest application window with the new rules would be the one that closes on January 1st. But it's possible that it will go beyond that. So then it would be the July 1st application deadline that would be subject to the new rules. Next slide. And then lastly, this slide contains links to all kinds of helpful resources, hopefully, on the CASF programs. Each one has their own specifics and oddities. So I highly encourage you to consult the CPUC's websites for these individual programs. They're linked all here. I also encourage you to follow the CPUC's rulemaking of number 20.08021 to comment on any rule changes, see the announcements of awards. That includes the revised staff proposal for the Loan Loss Reserve Program. This is a program that I didn't really have time to discuss today, but is in development and was part of that SB 156 package from 2021. So we just recently, as in like a week ago, issued a revised staff proposal for how that program may function. So I encourage you to check that out and provide comments if you're interested. And to get on the CASF distribution list, just email your request to the email indicated here. And then lastly, I want to issue a plug to reach out to the regional broadband consortia in your area. As I indicated before, these can be really helpful resources for getting started on designing applications for your community or understanding what kinds of resources or programs are going to be most appropriate for determining for closing the digital divide in your community. And so with that, I think we are in the final Q&A.
We are. Thanks, Ben. You've earned your lunch today for sure. We'll take just a couple minutes here to see if we can get some last questions in, and then we'll try to wrap up by noon here for lunch. So a couple questions here for CASF, Ben. And again, then we'll try to circle back to questions on anything today. But what is the total funding available in the current round of CASF infrastructure grants?
That's a good question. I can try to pull that up real quick.
Okay. No worries. We can always get that information out to folks. Let me just go on to the next question here. So do any of these different funding sources offer funds for installation of fiber for purposes of traffic signal communication?
My initial response would be no, because the focus of these programs is delivering broadband service to end users, so households. I don't want to completely close the door, because it's possible that there may be a particular way to craft an application that would work within one of these programs, but I'd have to ask you to reach out directly with some more details on your idea, and maybe we can come up with an idea.
Okay, great. And I see several questions just popping in, asking similarly to specific things that can be funded. So I would refer you to what Ben just answered right now, to send us those specific questions, and we can try to get you more information. Just circling back to some of the questions that we didn't get to back in the B section. So can you tell me or tell us, Ben, what is the last date that local jurisdictions can add points? So I update the address data for BEAD implementation.
So to add points, that is a matter of the FCC's fabric. And so I'd encourage you to refer to the FCC's broadband data collection process. I am not sure if there will be another opportunity to add points to that fabric, but if so, it would be later this year. And that would be information that you could get from the FCC.
Ben. Also from BEAD, this person says that they signed the license agreement for the federal funding account portal, but haven't received anything telling them how they can access the data. Is that something that they should be getting a follow-up email about, or how would they be notified?
I think you should be getting a notification, but I'm not certain. I'd say reach out to me, and I can make sure to put you in touch with the right people if there's been some kind of a problem.
Okay. Another question from your BEAD section. Does the FFA require grantees to have open access network?
To the extent that FFA funds middle mile, I believe it does require open access. Otherwise, I believe that is a requirement.
Thank you. And I guess we'll go ahead and end it there. So Hope, I'll turn it back to you. Just folks, if we weren't able to get to your question, please feel free to either reach out to your local liaisons or to Ben. He's offered up himself to answer any questions. We're happy to help get you some answers for some of your more detailed and specific questions, or questions that we may have missed.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank both Ben and Cole for their informative presentations today. We dropped quite a few links in the chat, so hopefully people were able to gain that information. Before concluding, I want to point out some additional useful tools on this page. You can find all of these at our homepage at cpuc.ca.gov. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.